Okay, so in this question, I will talk about the quadratics, in particular with regards to solving versus factoring. So many students are often confused about what they're supposed to do when they're asked to solve a quadratic equation, or if they're asked to factor a quadratic. So let me give you maybe a little bit of a scheme. So if I talk about quadratics, so I'm talking about, so hold on a second, ax squared plus bx plus c. So this is a quadratic. And a, b, and c are subnumbers. So I can be asked to say maybe solve ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. Okay? So the way that you're going to recognize that I'm talking about solving an equation is there's going to be an equation. It's going to be something equals something else. And that should be able to, you should be able to boil it down to a quadratic. So what does it mean to solve an equation? To solve an equation, that means to find all values of x that satisfy that equation. So in other words, you gotta end up with x is equal to something, or x is an element of some set. So how do I solve a quadratic equation? There are many different ways. One way that is always going to work, so you don't really have to worry about the other ways, although they might be easier in some instances, is the quadratic formula. So the quadratic formula, you have to know this one by heart. Okay, so it's kind of like a Pythagoras or something like that, that you just for the rest of your life you know by heart. And it goes like this. So x, I'm going to write 1, 2, because I might have two possibilities, 0 or 1 possibility. So x is equal to negative b plus or minus a square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay, so to solve this quadratic equation, these are going to be the solutions. Okay, and I might have, so I might have two solutions. So I'll have two solutions if the discriminant, so this is called the discriminant, which is equal to b squared minus 4ac. In other words, what is underneath the square root, if that is a positive number, it's greater than 0. I'm going to have one solution if the discriminant is equal to 0, and I'm going to have no solutions if the discriminant is negative, because I can't take a square root of a negative number, at least not when I'm talking about real numbers. So this is what we do if you're asked to solve an equation that involves a quadratic. Now you always have to, like, sometimes it's not going to be something equals 0. You might have to rearrange the equation so that you put everything on one side and that you get it into this form, in which case you can apply the quadratic formula. Now the other thing you might be asked to do is to factor an expression of the form ax squared plus bx plus c. So notice here that here I don't have an equal sign. It's not an equation, it's just an expression. So what does that mean? That means to rewrite the expression, so expression as a product, a non-trivial product, so as a product of other expressions. So I'm not looking for, my answer's not going to be like x equals something or whatever. It has to be actually this thing, just looking a little bit differently, just rewritten. And how do I do this? Well, what I would have to do, there are many different ways, again, just like in solving quadratic equations. We can apply all different types of methods in factoring. But one thing that I definitely can do always is use the quadratic formula. So I'm going to, my answer is going to be a times x minus x1 times x minus x2. So in other words, what I started with, ax squared plus bx plus c, I'm going to be able to rewrite in this form, where x1 and x2 are what? Well, they're going to be just the solutions of the quadratic equation. There we go. So that is the basics of it. Now, let's see if I can consider an example. So here, let's say if the question, if I'm talking about a quadratic that looks like this, 6x squared minus 66x plus 168. And let's say the question is asking me to solve 6x squared minus 66x plus 168 equals 0. Okay, that is what I'm going to be, what I'm being asked. Then, what do I have to do? Well, this is a quadratic equation. This is my A. This is my B. And this is my C. This was the A. Okay? So the quadratic formula says that I have x is equal to negative b plus or minus a square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So in this particular case, I have negative, and then what's my b? My b is negative 66 plus or minus a square root of negative 66 all squared. Do not forget to put brackets around negative 66 because otherwise you will get a wrong answer. So minus 4 times a, which is 6, times c, which is 168. All divided by 2a, which is 2 times 6. And so if I put this into the calculator, first of all, negative 66 turns into positive 66, plus or minus, and I will get 18 for the square root portion, and then all divided by 12. So I'll have two possibilities. I have 66 plus 18 divided by 12, and that's 7. And I have 66 minus 18, and then divided by 12, which is 4. So there we go. The solutions are x is equal to 7 and x is equal to 4. But what if the question was to factor 6x squared minus 66x plus 168? Okay? So what do I have to do here? Remember that a quadratic can be factored in the following way. So that is going to be equal to, so 6x, let me put a line here, 6x squared minus 66x plus 168 is equal to a times x minus x1 times x minus x2, where a is what? A is 6. And what's x1, x2? Well, these are the roots of the quadratic equation. In other words, negative b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And I've already calculated those in the previous example. Those are 7 and 4. And so therefore, remember this means therefore, I can conclude that 6x squared minus 66x plus 168 is equal to a, which is 6, times x minus the first root, doesn't matter which order I take them in, so x minus 7 times x minus the second root, which is 4. And that's it. Now, if there are no, if there's only one solution to the quadratic equation, in other words, only one root, if the discriminant is equal to 0, then these two guys are going to be the same. So it would be x minus some number times x minus that same number. And if I got a negative number underneath the square root, it would mean that I cannot factor this any further. It means that it does not cross the x-axis. That's it.